Thank you for listening to this series, Understanding the Israel-Palestine Argument. I am not a historian, but I enjoy research and there are plenty of sources of information out there to create a clear dialogue. It's neither practical or possible for me to state all information in this series, as the history, politics, and details within are vast. So along with anything I state, I implore you to not just take my word, but also conduct your own additional research. This series is intended to give other perspectives into the history between the two peoples, and are not meant to be the only source to rely on, nor intended to encourage violence of any kind, neither verbally or physically. Thank you. In biblical times, over 4,000 years ago, there were a nation of people known as the Hebrews, otherwise also known as the Israelites, and they were people who descended from Abraham's second son, Isaac. Isaac was the son of Abraham's second wife, Sarah. Abraham was a man who was the first known figure to develop monotheist beliefs, which the main religions of today derived from, and he came to live in the region known as Canaan. He bought land from the Canaanites, which later became a greater country for his descendants, the Hebrews. The Hebrews or Israelites were united in their connection through blood to the land and their similar monotheist beliefs. They lived in a land we now today recognize as encompassing Israel and Palestine, South Lebanon and South Syria, West Jordan and Northeast Egypt. Over time, the Hebrews, while still all living in the land, naturally formed into 12 tribes based on their bloodlines, stemming back to each of the 12 sons of Jacob, who was a son of Isaac. Jacob was also known as Israel. Hence why the Hebrews were also known as the Israelites, and the 12 tribes were known as the 12 tribes of Israel. Later in time, the Israelites were taken from the land as slaves by the ancient Egyptians. After centuries of being slaves, the Israelites were free to return to the land from which they came, and they lived in the land which matched similar in borders as they previously owned under the banners of the 12 different tribes. The Israelites saw other nations how they operated, and demanded a king to be appointed of them. Saul was the name of the first king of Israel, and so where the land was split by the regions the 12 tribes occupied, collectively it was known as the Kingdom of Israel. The region we recognize today as Gaza became occupied by a group of people who are the Greek equivalent version of the Vikings, in the sense of finding new lands and looking to kill, rape and pillage different communities. These people were called the Philistines. The Philistines invaded the Kingdom of Israel, killing many Israelites. Saul couldn't lead his people to fight back the forces and subsequently died. Israel looked for a new leader and David stepped forward to defeat the Philistines' biggest warrior, Goliath. As a result, Israel was eventually able to force the Philistines back, and David led Israel to victory. David became Israel's second king and was anointed in Hebron, which is where Abraham is said to be buried. King David united the 12 tribes under one banner, the banner of the biggest tribe, Judea. As all the people were united under the banner of Judea, they were collectively known as the Jews, in the Kingdom of Israel. And Israel was now the first sovereign Jewish state. As you can see, the word Jew does not mean a religion. It is the name of the united nation of people in the Kingdom of Israel. All the Jews were connected in 3 ways. 1. By their bloodlines, all descending to Isaac and his son Jacob, otherwise known as Israel. 2. By the connection to the land of Israel from which their histories, cultures and customs are associated and stem from. And 3. By their similar monotheist beliefs. Take away the third, more religious point, and they are still Jews as being descendants from the tribe of Judea. They were and still remain a connected people indigenous to the land we see today as being Israel and closely surrounding areas. Where religious aspects have often become more secular in many members of the community, their customs, cultures and festivals connected to Israel and their people's histories still and have always remained prevalent in the Jewish community. For example, in their festival of Passover, celebrating their people being freed from Egypt, and also at the end of the festival Yom Kippur. It is customary to end the festival saying, "Next year in Jerusalem," the capital and symbol of Israel. And another name for Jerusalem is Zion. Another example of how their customs and cultures remaining connected to Israel is also shown in their festival Sukkot, which is about celebrating the harvest in the land, with customary association to agriculture connected to Israel, such as date palm leaves and an etrog fruit. Their indigenous connection to the land and their history is clear throughout their customs and cultures. Their beliefs, the land, and their history are all intertwined. No matter what adversity the Jews faced over the following centuries and thousands of years, their customs and cultural roots remain strong with a continued connection to Israel, and for those cast out of it to live with hope of one day being able to safely return. Next year in Jerusalem. To convert to Judaism and to be classed as Jewish is not a case of simply adopting the associated religious monotheist beliefs and then claiming to be Jewish, or doing something equivalent to a baptism. You must prove yourself to represent all aspects of what it means to be Jewish. Where you may not descend from the bloodline of Isaac, you must go through a rite of passage, which also matches that similar to what it takes you to become a citizen of a modern country. You must learn the histories, adopt the cultures and customs as if they are yours, join Jewish communities and support them for a period of time, and take a test. Your test won't be one of a piece of paper. It is a test of judgment conducted by the rabbis, in essence the community leaders. You must show that you don't just hold the knowledge but also understand the emotion of what it is to be Jewish, as if the history of the people are now your own histories. As Jews stem from the same bloodline, there are many who believe that even if you go through this rite of passage to convert, you will never truly be Jewish without actually being a descendant of the 12 tribes. This is a point of perspective and individual opinion, and not defined in Jewish culture. The majority will accept those who convert, provided those that convert look to join the communities and respect the cultures, customs, and histories, and can proudly identify themselves as part of the community. If you just want to follow the religious aspects and that is it, you will never be accepted by most Jewish communities as able to define yourself as Jewish. You can say you follow religious beliefs that are the same as Jews, but you wouldn't be in essence granted citizenship in the community. The same as if you might celebrate Chinese New Year, but if you haven't lived and worked there for a number of years, being a part of the community, you won't receive a Chinese passport on those grounds. Those who define Judaism solely on the grounds of religious aspects are very wrong. It is primarily a nation of people first. Despite this point being controversial to some, the fact is you do not need to follow the same religious beliefs as most Jews to remain classed as a Jew. For those who are not converts, if you have the bloodline and still accept the histories of your people as your own, you are Jewish and therefore connected to and remain indigenous to the land of Israel. Okay, so if the land was called Israel and Jewish means from the united tribe of Israel, Judea, how did the land be known as Palestine? After 2 generations of kings of Israel following on after David, there became disputes between the 12 tribes, and the northern tribes split from the southern. This made the northern area be now classed as the Kingdom of Israel, and the southern be classed as in its own right as Judea. However, the term Jew is still used to refer to all who descend from the united 12 tribes. The Jews' history is one where they didn't just face the Philistines in a battle to avoid being exiled and ethnically cleansed from their land. They also faced further armies and colonizers later in history, such as the Babylonians and Assyrians. The Assyrians exiled the Jews from the now separated part of the Kingdom of Israel, and they fled to the region of Mesopotamia and eventually across North Africa, and are collectively known as the Lost Tribes of Israel. But the Jews of Judea, who were exiled by the Babylonians, eventually found passage back to the land after 70 years. Following this, nearly 2,100 years ago, the Romans were the latest army to invade the land of Israel and Judea, colonized it, and attempted to exile the Jews. But the Jews fought back over many years with a series of revolts. The Jews eventually lost, and the majority faced forced exile approximately 1,900 years ago. But it's good to note a number of Jews found ways to still remain in the land in their now separated small communities. This period is known as the Jewish diaspora, whereby the majority of Jews were forced to leave their land and find homes elsewhere scattered across the world. As an insult to the Jews for trying to fight back the Romans to be able to keep their homes and remove the colonization, the Romans decided to change the name of the land to Palestine in an attempt to rid the land of connection to the Jews. The name of Palestine is given to specifically represent being anti-Jewish and be an insult, using the basis of the name of the Philistines, who were the first to try to ethnically cleanse the land of the Jews since their return from Egypt. To put it in perspective, to change the name Israel to Palestine would be the same equivalence as if when the Westerners took slaves from Africa, if they decided to change the name of the region we see today as Mali to KKK White Power Land, in an attempt to rid the land and people of their indigenous roots and replace it with an insult to them. It would hold a similar equivalence. So the land was previously a Jewish sovereign state. Did it then become a sovereign state of Palestine, Muslim or otherwise? No. The land formerly known as the United Kingdom of Israel was now fully colonized and formed a part of bigger empires. The region was never again classed as its own sovereign country or state at any time up until the 20th century. Even to this day, where the majority of the world now recognize Palestine as its own state, it is not recognized as a sovereign state by around 30% of the United Nations, including most of the West. Whereas only 15% of the UN do not recognize Israel, and most of these are other Islamic states. No person publicly recorded themselves as ever identifying as Palestinian until Khalil Beidas in 1898, a scholar from the region who translated Russian work where he referred to the Arabs of the region as Palestinians. Alternatively, all other people in this region except for the Jews would identify themselves as a representative of one of the colonizing nations, for example, Roman, or one of the future Arab Muslim caliphates such as the Ottomans, or later identified themselves associated to one of the surrounding regions of Egypt or Syria, or simply just as Arab. However, the Jews who remained in the land across thousands of years, and those exiled, always remained identifying themselves as Jewish or Israelites of the tribe Judea, from when it was the United Kingdom of Israel. More people started to identify themselves as Palestinian only after the exiled Jews were granted permission to return to their lands of origin and purchase unoccupied areas when the British, with the backing of the UN, decreed the land to once again return as a Jewish state. This was as a result of the fall of the last Caliphate empire, the Ottomans, and all the land occupied by the Ottomans in essence became a free-for-all, whereby each region requested their own sovereignty predominantly as Islamic states, and the British, French, and with backing from the United Nations, drew lines on a map to divide borders. The population of the Jews in the Ottoman Empire was around 1%, and so as much of the land was being split on religious identifiers, people requesting to have separate sovereignties as Islamic states, the Jews also requested lands. But instead of requesting land matching the 1% of their population in the fallen empire, they requested to return to the land from which they are indigenous to, which was equivalent to only 0.2% of the fallen Ottoman Empire covering the Middle East and North Africa regions, the Old Kingdom of Israel. From the 1920s, more Arabs in this region began identifying themselves as Palestinians in a collective effort to present an argument the land should be an Islamic state, and in opposition to the decree of it becoming once again a Jewish state, and only once they recognized more Jews coming back to the land. To be identified as Palestinian as a collective effort was a way to counter the population of Jews coming in, where the Arabs became worried the state will lose its Islamic majority, and to respond to it by making their own counter-indigenous claims. It was not a claim made by a culmination of identity and nationality to the land, and long and ancient histories of a people or customs and cultures directly connected to this specific region and no other. There were people who had lived there for centuries, but it was a tiny population of people, and none were recorded to previously ever identify themselves as associated to this specific land as Palestinians. They didn't have a flag or even a specific dialect connected to just this specific land. Their claim and creation of the identity to be Palestinian was for the most part driven by religion, a way to delegitimize the claim of the Jews and keep the land connected to all other surrounding Arab regions as an Islamic state. This is not to say those who lived in the land previous do not have a right to remain. They of course do, and most have. However, their claim can only be made on the grounds of living there already prior to the land being declared to return back to being a Jewish state, and cannot make the claim for the majority as being an indigenous claim. As per described, the majority of people express no connection to the land prior to the British decree in a way that is separate to that of a colonizer compared to being indigenous. This by no means makes their claims to the land any less than that of the Jews, but it by no means can equate to being a stronger claim to the land than the Jews, when considering the claim on the basis of a people simultaneously originally being from the land, connected to the land by customs, culture, language and tradition, and our people always self-identifying as indigenous to specifically this land. This is not a claim Palestinian Arabs can make, stretching back more than just a few years, whereas the Jews can make that claim, stretching back thousands of years. Maybe you'll ask, but the Jews got exiled by the Romans. That was 2,000 years ago. How can they still have claim to be indigenous to the land? The former chief rabbi of the United Hebrew Congregations of the Commonwealth was quoted to say to be Jewish is to have a sense of memory. Simply put, for the most part the Jews never forgot their roots, where they are from, their customs and traditions stemming from their land, and always expressed a desire to one day to return when it is safe to do so. Next year in Jerusalem. The sad fact is, it was never safe to actually return. And even today there is a clear argument to say it's still not safe to return without being at risk of those trying to ethnically cleanse the Jews. So put it this way, how do you put a number, a time period of when an indigenous people are no longer classed as indigenous when they have never given up on their identity? The Jews kept their indigenous language alive, their customs and traditions specifically connected to the land. I would put the argument forward that indigenous people are only no longer indigenous to a land if they themselves choose to disassociate their identity, customs, traditions, and teachings from the land. It cannot be up to someone outside of these people to decide when they lose their identities connected to the land. Would you state the Native Americans, after being conquered and many killed by the colonizers from Britain and other European countries, are no longer allowed to be classed as actually native or indigenous to the land? I'm guessing no. You may make the claim that they will forever remain indigenous because they never left the land and always had a presence of their people in the land, no matter how small. And the same can be said about the Jews. In spite of the ethnically cleansing attempts, exiling and purgatory they faced, there always remained a population of Jews in the land. Sometimes it was a very small population, and over the years it increased, with Jews all connected by the same ancestors returning. But regardless of the size of population, they never left the land, no matter the many attempts of different colonizers. Maybe you'll look to make the claim that those who remained are indigenous, but those that were forced to leave lost this right. But if you make this claim, and disregard that they kept a hold of their identities connected to the land wherever they went, then on this basis, if hypothetically the Jews in the formation of today's modern Israel completely ethnically cleanse the land of any people who are non-Jewish, then you should now claim those Jews to be indigenous and those exiled have now lost their claim. That sounds absurd, right? Luckily, you don't have to make this decision or claim, as even after Israel won all 3 major wars waged on them in the 20th century, they still did not remove the entire population of those who weren't Jewish. Nearly 50% of the land today split as Israel and Palestine are Muslim Arabs. Sadly, the same can't be said about the surrounding Arab regions, where all have ethnically cleansed their lands of Jews.